My father, Steve Engel, was born to Polish immigrants who emigrated to Canada. And as a toddler, so my father was born in Canada, and as a toddler, his parents then came to the United States, settling in Brooklyn, New York. Life was tough for a lot of immigrants who came to the United States in the 20s, and then of course the Great Depression in the 1930s. You could say my father was a Depression child when our country went through this horrific depression. People out of work, and it went on for years. And I think that type of thing never leaves you. And I think he carried that throughout his entire life. It's interesting. In some cases, I think he was, because of that, he was risk adverse in certain financial matters, but then there was another part of his personality that wasn't so risk adverse. And so it was sort of a dual kind of thing going on in his head. But certainly on financial matters, he would never ever take any risk. And he had several opportunities later in life that were really slam dunk opportunities, whether to be invest in something or buy property, and he would never do it. And I think it's because of his experience of living through the Great Depression. So my father was a son of a tailor, and he ended up going to work for a couple of big textile companies. I think his first job, which lasted I think like 20 years, maybe even more, was this company called Conhall Marks, which is no longer in existence. And my father was in charge of international sales, so he would travel all over the world. And when I tell people that he's been to almost every country in the world, that's a fact. He went everywhere. He met with Fidel Castro himself in Cuba, because in those days, in the 50s, that's what you did. If you wanted to do business with Cuba, you did it directly with Castro. And so he's had some amazing experiences in terms of his work and, dealing with business and other folks in other countries. He was pretty amazing. And in fact, over that period of time when he was doing this, he actually taught himself. He could speak fluently in 4 or 5 different languages, which is pretty impressive. So I mentioned that he had been to many, many countries. So let me just outline that for you. He went to China. He went to Asia. He went to the Middle East. He was in Afghanistan and almost got shot in Afghanistan while he was running through the airport trying to get onto a plane. He just sort of bypassed security and ran to the plane because it was leaving. There weren't that many planes leaving Afghanistan wherever he was going at that time, and he could hear the clicks of the machine guns when he got onto the tarmac. So he put up his hands and slowly walked back and had to stay there for a few days until they worked this out. So, and all this travel, by the way, took place in the 50s and 60s, which was really the dawn of modern air travel. So this was sort of something new for people, and a lot of people were nervous about it. But my dad had a job to do, had to provide for his family, and I actually think after a while, he thought it was a great big adventure. And as you can imagine, traveling all over the world, not too many people got to do that. And of course, air travel was quite different back then than it is now. I would say it was actually a lot more comfortable than it is now, flying commercially. He made friends all over the place, and was very successful. I think until the end, where he sort of got tired of doing it, and he was tired in general from doing all this. And of course, while he was doing this, there were like 6 months out of the year where we wouldn't see him. So he had 4 kids, myself, my brothers John and Mike, and my sister Mady. And sometimes I wonder how that may have affected us, not seeing him so much during those early days. But But again, he had to do what he had to do to make money, put food on the table, and that was his job. So earlier I had mentioned that my father in financial matters was risk adverse, but there were some aspects. The one thing that I always try to tell people about Steve Engel is that he had a sense of justice in him, and I'm not quite sure where he got this from, but he was very much right is right, wrong is wrong. And I think key to his entire story was the fact that as a young man in his mid-30s, he went to my older brother's school one day and saw my brother praying in school. And after school, went up to my brother and said, "What's that about?" And my brother said, "Well, we have to do that. Everyone prays in the morning at school." And again, this was during the 1950s. And my father was like, "What is this going on? What is happening?" So, my father, felt that this was wrong, and that someone of Jewish faith should not be asked to say a Christian prayer in school. So he took the school district, which was the Herrick School District on Long Island, where we all went to school, and he contacted the Civil Liberties Union, and he went to court, and the case made it all the way to the Supreme Court. And my father and several other neighbors in our neighborhood banded together and won, which is pretty amazing. So the risk here was that he was actually putting his career at risk, because a lot of people thought differently about religion in the 50s and 60s. They wanted it in schools, and they thought it was an important part of a child's education. But this again becomes a separation of church and state. So my father got death threats. There were cross burnings on neighbors' lawns who were supporting this as well. So it was actually pretty traumatic, I think, for my older brother, Mike. But again, my father was very righteous in his beliefs. And for a young man like that in his 30s, to take a case like this all the way to the Supreme Court and win is pretty amazing. I have several stories about my dad standing up for other people's rights. I mean, this is a man who was a liberal, who marched with Martin Luther King, with my brother John, hanging around his neck. He was once entertaining a African-American client in Manhattan. I guess it was during the early 1960s at the 21 Club. And that's where everyone went during the heyday of the 21 Club. And of all people, Mickey Mantle, the New York Yankees, the legendary Mickey Mantle, came in with Whitey Ford, another legendary Yankee, and others into the 21 Club and started making fun of my father's client, who was black, a woman, and my father, being a little crazy himself, actually, the story goes, he actually stood up and said to Mickey Mantle, you've got a problem with her, then you've got a problem with me. And they almost got into a fist fight until Mickey Mantle's teammates pulled him away from my father, which is a good thing, because I think Mickey Mantle would have destroyed my father. Although I gotta say, back, they make people a lot bigger these days. My father was 5'11", probably 220. He was a big guy for back then, and so, but nevertheless, Mickey Mantle is Mickey Mantle. It's just another one of the tidbit stories of my father's adventure. Also, in our neighborhood, we lived in a lily white neighborhood until one black family moved in, and I remember the father from that family coming over to our house, and my father sort of consoling him because he was the victim of a lot of discrimination in the neighborhood, and my father just saying, stay strong, I'm with you, nothing will happen to you, I'm here. So again, his sense of right and wrong was very strong. And I think that's one of the attributes in my dad that I always will admire. The fact that he stood up for the underdog when it wasn't popular. And I think that's something that we should all think about and probably do more of ourselves in our daily lives. So, my dad had a very interesting, productive fruitful life. I don't know if he was always that happy. I think he always wanted to achieve more. He was very much a middle-class guy, and I think that always bugged him, that he wasn't as wealthy as my mother's brother and other people that he knew. But you know, he had a hand in raising 4 kids. He always did well by us. Yeah, he was a little crazy. He was a bit of a screamer, and he was not very good at relating to us kids. But again, he grew up in a time, I mean, his parents, Polish immigrants, you know, not well versed in the language, very tough, very difficult. His father was a very difficult man. My grandfather, who I knew, very difficult guy. And so it was just that time frame as well. So I think he did the best he could do, which is in terms of relating to us. And I think towards the end of his life, he would reach out to me and let me know that he loved me. And as I said, I think some of my siblings may have more of an issue or problem with my dad. But I just, for me, it was he did the best he could. And sometimes that's all you need. The one thing I would say about my dad as well is that, you know, as mentioned, I don't think he felt as successful as he thought he could be or wanted to be. But from my perspective, he was one of the most successful people I've ever known. You know, he got us all through college. He did what he had to do. Went to the Supreme Court. How many people do that? Had another career after his corporate career ended. He went into business for himself, and actually for a few years that went very well too. So I think he was really rich, but like a lot of people, he just didn't know it.